So last week, Ghost Ship Games did their On the Horizon live stream, and they showcased a lot of information regarding a lot of the projects that they're working on, but more specifically, they did a huge info dump on Rogue Core. Now, last week, I did a brief synopsis of the stream itself and talked about everything that they went through and touched on a few things regarding Rogue Core, but I didn't really go too far into detail. Today, I'm going to be diving a lot deeper into the stuff that we saw in Rogue Core and trying to uncover any sort of hidden things that we maybe didn't notice regarding the teaser trailers that we got or the information that we did get, and try to see just how much information they actually did give us involving Rogue Core that maybe they didn't intend on. Keep in mind as I go through this that a lot of the information is still really early in development. Rogue Core is not even close to a closed alpha yet, so a lot of the information and stuff that you're going to see is probably subject to change, and many of the stuff that they went through or showcased is still unfinished or is still very early in development, so keep that in mind. But even with how early the game is, a lot of the stuff that they're showcasing is really shaping up to be really good. So without further ado, let's go through everything that they told us about Rogue Core in the On the Horizon stream and see just how insanely game-changing this is going to be for the Deep Rock franchise in general. So first, looking at the little teaser trailer that they gave us at the very beginning of the Rogue Core segment, we see that it starts off with a couple of shots of the dwarves running towards this strange glass-like looking barrier that's very ominous and very scary looking, and we see it opening up, allowing the players to move through to the next area. I think the most logical thing that this could possibly be is the beginning of the run itself, or it could potentially be some sort of event later on, but in any event, it does look very intimidating, and it has these really cool effects that happen as it closes behind the players to allow them to continue on further into the run. We then see the players enter this sort of beginning room, which is like this prep room slash locker room that you start off each individual run at, which we'll talk about a little bit more later, where in which each player gets to pick their first starting weapon. That way you at least have something at the beginning of the run. And here we see the selection screen of the particular different weapons that are accessible. And we can see a mixture of weapons that we are used to and have seen before in DeepRockGalactic, as well as some new ones that have some very funny placeholder art. We see the Deep Core GK2 rifle, the Jury Rig boomstick, the cryo cannon, and a new weapon called the Shock Blaster. And we also get a couple more interesting pieces of information that are not immediately made aware of us. First, if you look at the very top, you see the turn order in which people are going to be able to select these weapons. This is going to be the case for both weapon picking and upgrading and all that kind of stuff. Essentially, one person is going to be able to pick the thing that they want, and then the next person will be able to pick theirs, and so on and so forth. We then see different tags and stat increases on each individual weapon that give us the tags and categories that they are a part of. For example, the GK2 rifle is, of course, a rifle, a long-range weapon, a standard weapon, and we can see that it has 35% increased reload speed and 55% reduced spread. Whereas something like the cryo cannon, for example, is a close-range weapon, a heavy weapon, and an exotic weapon. I'm guessing it's exotic because it's not using traditional firearm type logic. It's not an energy weapon, it's not a ballistic weapon, it's more of just an elemental spewing weapon. And then even with the new Shock Blaster weapon, which I kind of want to see what it actually looks like, you can see it's a long-range pistol that is also very high-tech. Now, what's interesting is that's the only one that is grayed out, whereas the rest of them are green, which makes me assume that there is some sort of a rarity system with the weapons in question. It might be possible that you could get the GK2 rifle, but it could potentially be a higher or lower rarity, which means it might come with higher stats, better equipment. You know, you might be able to get like a legendary or an epic version of the GK2 that just has significantly stronger stats. And then we can also see a couple of other small snippets of information given to us. We can see that you can have up to 4 weapons, it seems, with one weapon being held by a placeholder weapon, I'm assuming that is. And then the last thing we see, which I will touch more on this later, is that Mark seems to be playing as the Spotter class, which is a very interesting thing because they showcase a couple of classes later on, which we're going to talk about, but the Spotter is not one that they showcase. So it's very interesting that we get to see another class mentioned, even though we don't get to see too much of it. And then the last thing in the top left, you can see your personal upgrades. I'm guessing this is going to be where your particular upgrades are shown that you have picked throughout the run, so that way you can better gauge what exactly it is that you want to pick. And then we see a couple more shots of the dwarves moving through the caves and gathering this mineral, which isn't made apparent at first, but this is actually going to be the Exponite that we collect as we go through these particular runs. The Exponite is the mineral in question that we are down here to try to gather and also get information on. but it's also what we use throughout the course of the game. Exmonite is basically the mineral that is going to allow us to improve ourselves and collect upgrades as we go through these runs. We then see another shots of the dwarves going through different corridors with man-made, or I guess dwarf-made machinery, as well as the normal cave systems as well. And then they come across this strange machine that appears to be some sort of event, or almost like a machine type event, which is actually an Exmonite chunk miner. This plays into a further thing that we're going to talk about later on, whereas another way that you can upgrade yourself throughout the course of the game is going to be by completing these optional objectives that might show up during the course of the run. Now, something like this is going to be us mining a gigantic chunk of Exmonite that is going to cause enemies to spawn, but the devs have said that there will be other types of optional objectives that will come across randomly throughout the course of the game. This is just one of those examples. We then see a couple more shots of what appears to be this strange industrial type elevator. I'm guessing this is either how we first get into the particular cave or how we progress to the next stage of the dive itself. Unfortunately, we don't have a crazy amount of information, but we do see some red sugar in the top right-hand side of the cave, which lets us know that red sugar is, of course, going to be another factor in this game as well as it is in normal Deep Rock, but we kind of already figured that. And then next we see another shot of the mining machine that we activated, as well as some very ominous looking orbs in the distance. I'm not sure if these are supposed to be enemy spawn points or if these are just supposed to be natural things that are occurring in this particular biome, as we'll go on to talk about later. The biomes in this particular game are going to be a little bit different than the ones in normal Deep Rock, so this could just be an aspect that we're seeing from that, or it could be that this is where enemies are coming out of. It's kind of a little bit too early to say, and we haven't really seen them in action, but they're still very ominous looking. And then the next shot, we see a couple more dwarves running past another very ominous looking orb, which, as we'll talk about later, this is further into the actual core of Hoxus itself, towards what appears to be another upgrade terminal that they are going to access. Then we get to see several snippets of the dwarves working on machinery, as well as interacting with the new sort of Mule 2.0 that we are getting, who is named Elise. Elise is essentially the new Molly. She is going to be the new drone that we are going to be putting our minerals into. However, she functions a lot differently than Molly. She could fly, which is really cool, and she looks very sci-fi. But Elise is also going to be a core part of how we improve ourselves, because she is another way that we upgrade. As I stated before, we are going to be gathering Exmonite throughout the course of the run, and we deposit that Exmonite into Elise, and she in turn will allow us to upgrade ourselves with actual individual upgrades. I can see that happening right now, and it functions very similarly to how we saw the dwarves choose their weapons earlier. There is a string of upgrades that are here that each person gets to take turns and decide what it is that they want. And we can see sort of a little bit of a example of some of the kinds of upgrades that we can get. You can see things like Gunslinger would definitely make it so that way people who like to use pistol builds will be right at home. Impact Radiance seems to boost the effectiveness of exotic weapons, so things like the Cryo Cannon, and I'm guessing the Flamethrower and Sludge Pump are going to be boosted by this as well. Hyper Efficiency, which makes your high-tech weapons better and also makes your shield significantly stronger, which seems really strong, especially when compared to the next one, which just gives you extra shield. I can't really see a reason why you would ever take that over hyper efficiency, but again, keep in mind this is all placeholder stuff, so a lot of this could change. And then there are also very simple ones like a standard health boost that gives you a full heal, which for all we know could be very valuable in this particular type of game, because we could potentially be in a lot more dangerous situations than we are in normal Deep Rock. And then the next thing we see is a very interesting shot of the dwarves interacting with another sort of upgrade station, but this is actually one where you upgrade your weapon itself. So instead of normal Deep Rock, where when you're in the space rig, you get to upgrade your weapons at the weapon upgrade terminal, and you get to choose things like more ammo, more recoil control, more damage. Here, you are going to be doing it during the run itself. So I'm assuming you're going to be finding these particular weapon benches as you progress throughout the course of the run, and you're going to be able to increase certain stats of the weapons that you are currently using, such as making the recoil better, making the weak spot damage a lot stronger. Again, it's still very early to say, but that seems to be what they're going for with this. Then afterwards, we see another couple of shots of the dwarves traversing various machinery and various different aspects, and then we see them approaching this gate that says level 4 above it. So I'm guessing this is going to be how we go into the further levels of the caves itself and how we further progress the runs. I'm guessing once we get done with the particular section of the area that we're in right now, then you go into these particular cages and they will bring you down to the lower levels where you will continue to go even deeper into Hoxus's core. which makes the most sense. And then the last thing we see is the dwarves approaching basically the Eye of Sauron in a wall. No, this is not the core of Hoxus itself, but this is now fully into what we call the core biome of Hoxus. As we'll go on to discuss a little bit later, basically the biomes that we're going to be going through in Rogue Core are going to be similar to the ones that we see in Deep Rock. However, as we get deeper and deeper into the run and go further, the core biome, which is the biome that is around Hoxus's core, is going to be slowly bleeding in more and more to the biomes that we go through. So for example, on the first stage of a particular run, you will be, say, in Crystalline Caverns, and you will have mostly what you're used to in DeepRockGalactic with some strange things poking up through that you were maybe have not used to seeing before. But as you get further and further, and eventually once you get down to the end, you'll see stuff like this, which is just very alien stuff that we have not seen before, and this is the kind of stuff to expect once you get really further into the run. And it's very intimidating, very ominous looking, and it really makes the biomes feel significantly more powerful than they were before. So then after that little teaser that they gave us at the very beginning, then they started going through a lot more information about each of the various aspects, talking about biomes, upgrades, the Ramrod itself, the enemies, and the classes that we also have access to. And there's some information that they showed us and some information that they maybe accidentally gave us too without even really realizing it. So going through everything from start to finish, first thing they talked about was, of course, the biomes. And I sort of hinted at this a little bit earlier, but the biomes are going to be done the same way that they were in Deep Rock, where they're completely procedurally generated. You're not going to really have two seeds that are exactly the same. You might have some similarities, but for the most part, it is going to be fully procedurally generated. So you will have unique cave variations every single time. Now, because we are going into actual facilities that DeepRockGalactic used in the past, we are going to be getting obviously natural occurring caves and cave formations, but we're also going to be getting artificial structures. We are going to be getting things like bridges, like elevators, like machinery that we're actually able to interact with, elevators that we can call up and down, things that show that the dwarves have been here before, the mining corporation has been here before, but something bad happened, obviously, and that is going to be apparent throughout the course of the entire run, which is going to make things look very different because we are not used to seeing that in normal Deep Rock. The most that we see is maybe the crash to drop pod at the salvage operations, or just any sort of lost equipment, which is put in really weird ways. Here it's going to look a lot more natural because the company has been here before. And as I said previously, the core biome that is basically going to be unique to Rogue Core is going to be its own separate biome that is going to bleed throughout the course of the entire run, and you're going to see more and more of it. So you're going to see more wacky structures, more crazy cave formations, more very alien looking stuff. Things reminiscent to the core stone from season 5 is going to be very prominent here, and more as you go further. And overall, the biome design looks very interesting, and I cannot wait to see how it sort of evolves, because this is going to be something similar to a deep dive where we keep going from stage to stage. But as we go deeper and deeper, the biomes are going to look more and more different. And then the next section that they talked about was, of course, the upgrades. And the upgrades are probably the most important aspect to a degree when it comes to a game like this, because upgrading is essentially what you want to do the most because it's how you progress. And the way that they described it is similar to normal roguelike titles and different from normal DeepRockGalactic, where you would upgrade yourself in the space rig, put your loadout together, put your build together, and then go from there. Here, like a traditional roguelike, you're going to be upgrading yourself basically as you go through the mission. Now, there are going to be meta upgrades that are going to apply no matter what, that you will be able to unlock on the Ramrod or whatever the case may be, that they really weren't able to get into a whole lot of detail with, but they did say that that is going to be a factor. But when it comes to your loadout, when it comes to your gear, when it comes to your weapons and your traversal tools and all that kind of stuff, it is going to be a progressive thing that you do throughout the course of the run itself. And it all starts in the very beginning, where you enter this sort of prep locker room type thing, where you and your entire team will be able to interact with this table, which we saw in the beginning of that teaser trailer, that will allow you to pick your starter weapon and your traversal tool. And again, like I said before, you're going to have to pick and decide and talk amongst your teammates and figure out who gets what, who's going to go for what, depending on what class such and such is playing. And as of right now, the weapons and traversal tools that we saw are pretty similar to what we have seen in normal Deep Rock, but chances are they're going to add more later, or at the very least change them up to a certain degree. Still a little bit too early to say, but the fact that you have the ability to sort of have freeform weapon and traversal tools means that you can put together weapon combinations that people have wanted to see for a long time. If you want to use the driller's drills and use the gunner's minigun along with other fancy new weapons, you can definitely do that. One thing you can do in multiplayer, especially if you're not with a pre-made team, if you're not with your buddies or with people that you trust, is you do have the ability to heart specific weapons or upgrades or whatever the case may be to let people know that are in your lobby that you maybe can't talk to, hey, I would like this kind of goes with my build, and then they may or may not take it. It's just kind of up to the person that you're with. Things like that can always be a little bit iffy, but I feel like if any community can make it work, the Deep Rock community is probably going to make it work the best. And another thing that they mentioned in the stream itself that I don't believe they actually showcased is you are going to be able to see your teammates' build. You're going to be able to see what they have, the weapons they have, the upgrades they have, the perks that they have, the equipment that they have. That way you can discuss and talk and say like, okay, I see that you're going for a very heavy ice element build and this straight up boosts ice damage. Obviously, I'm not going to take that, and that's more appropriate for you. So things like that are going to be very, very important. And then talking again about more upgrades, again, I mentioned Elise, who is essentially the new Molly, and we see a little bit more of that in a clip that they showcased of the actual process of what that is like. Basically, you collect Exponite as you go through the particular mission, and then when you deposit enough of it into Elise, she will basically open up and become this upgrade station that when all players are close to her, as a group, you will get to choose another set of upgrades that will improve you. And this can obviously happen many times throughout the course of a particular run or a particular stage of a run, because it just depends on how much Exponite you acquire. So you obviously want to collect as much Exponite as humanly possible, and the fact that you have to all be together means you do have to stick together, be as a group, and communicate with each other to know where everybody is. The main premise I'm getting from Rogue Core is that it is significantly more team-oriented than DeepRockGalactic. Not saying that DeepRockGalactic obviously is a team-oriented, because it is, but in normal Deep Rock, it's very easy for people to just sort of go off and do their own thing and not really participate in the team to a good degree. And in this, they're definitely trying to make it seem like you need to be with the team a lot of the times because you are really working together in a lot more ways than normal. And then they did mention something that they don't have a whole lot of info on, but more on the solo end. You are going to be able to acquire things called biostations that they referred to, which give you a way to improve yourself outside of the team orientation. So something like just more movement speed or more ammo capacity or something along those lines. Again, they didn't really give a whole lot of information, but they did say that there are going to be ways for you to improve yourself without necessarily relying on the team. And then the last thing that they mentioned in terms of upgrading were the optional objectives that I mentioned earlier. These are things like the large Exponite crystal mining that we saw in the trailer earlier. Things like that are going to show up randomly throughout the course of a particular run, and those will give you even more ways to improve yourself, because completing those objectives will either give you the ability to upgrade yourself straight up or give you a crap ton of Exponite that you will use to deposit into Elise and then level up as well. And there are probably a lot more things involved with the upgrade system that they just didn't get a chance to talk about. And again, a lot of it is still very early in development, so keep that in mind when going forward. But still, the fact that they are putting a lot of effort into the upgrade system and giving us a lot of different ways to do it is going to make it so that way runs can really feel rich and with a very little amount of downtime. And then the next thing that they talked about was the new hub area that we have, which is Ramrod, which they didn't really have a whole lot of information on regards to the Ramrod. They just kind of showcased what it looks like visually, which wasn't even fully complete yet. It's not fully rendered, it's not fully fleshed out, but even the stuff that they showed made it actually look really good. The fact that they are pretty early on with all the modeling and all the rendering, and it still looks this good, makes me very confident for what the Ramrod is going to look like. You could see some cool stuff. There's like a Lloyd equivalent to there, so there is some kind of a bar or some sort of food there or something. You can see a weightlifting set, which I'm not sure if we're going to be able to interact with that. If so, that'd be really cool. And there just seems to be a lot of different places that we can go to. So it's going to be definitely similar to the space rig, where there's going to be a bunch of little cool Easter eggs that we can go to and check out. There's really not much to talk about the Ramrod right now, other than the fact that it is really cool. It is very, very cool in terms of design and shape, and I cannot wait to explore this new hub area. Now, the next two things are probably two of the biggest things that they talked about, which the first is the enemies, the new enemy types that we're going to be coming up against. To no one's surprise, the core spawn enemies that we got in Season 5 are going to be the primary family of enemies that we go up against. These are essentially our new glyphids. They are going to be replacing them in pretty much every single way, and they did showcase a lot of enemies, but they did not by any means showcase all of them. There are still a lot more enemies for us to discover and a lot more threats for us to face. But they did showcase 5 of the core spawn family of enemies and 2 of a different family of enemies known as the Rafcan family. First, they showcased the Correspond Crawler, which is the enemy that we know from Season 5 of DRG, but then they also showcased the Correspond Creeper, which is a smaller, less armored variation of the Crawler, which is basically going to be the new Grunt equivalent. They are small, they are unarmored, they are very creepy looking, absolutely off-putting, and these are basically going to be the new foot soldiers that we are going to be coming up against. Significantly easier to take out than the Correspond Crawlers from DRG, and the Crawlers themselves seem to be taking on the role of similar to the Glyphic Guard from DRG, where they're going to be more armored, probably a little bit slower, I would hope, or at least at the same speed, but they're going to be the slightly tougher and bigger variation that we have to go through. Then the other enemies that they showed us were the Correspond Scorcher, which is kind of like a weird combination of the Spitter and the Septic Spreader. It stays at a somewhat mid-range from you, so not quite as far as the Spitter, but it does keep a distance from you, and it lobs these fiery projectiles at you that can burn you and deal damage from a distance. Based on what I saw, they weren't quite as snipery as the Acid Spitters. I'd say they're more on par with, say, the Septic Spreaders, just without the massive AoE. And they don't seem to be quite as dangerous to take out or nor as tanky, so I imagine this is basically their take on the Slasher from DRG, just instead of it being a melee attacker, it's more of a ranged attacker. And again, they are also very off-putting and very terrifying. Then the next thing we saw was the Clamorhead, which is essentially the Correspond version of the Praetorian. And the Clamorhead is basically the big armored bastard that you are going to be coming across that does fill the role of the Praetorian. Essentially, they're armored, they're ugly, and they are slow and lumbering, but they hit really hard. They did mention that the animations and stuff were not fully fleshed out yet, so there's a lot of particles and effects and stuff that are missing, even though they still look really good in my opinion. And they have this sonic scream attack that's going to be able to do stuff to you. It was kind of hard to see exactly what it was doing because the guy who was showcasing it was in God mode, so nothing could hurt him. So it was kind of hard to see exactly what the sonic effect was actually doing to him. But still, the fact that it has a sort of ranged attack like that, which is really good, and it is very intimidating. Its presence is very strong. It's definitely going to be a tough enemy to take out. And then the last of the Correspond enemies that we saw was the Edge Stalker, which is probably my favorite design out of all the Correspond enemies that we've seen so far. It reminds me of something out of War of the Worlds, kind of. And this is essentially the long-range sniper. This is basically their equivalent to the Spitter, although upped a little bit. It keeps from a distance, it hides behind corners, and it tries to pot shot you from a distance. So you have to kind of bring it out into the open so that way you can get a clear shot at it, or use callouts and stuff to direct your allies to see where they are and bring it into a position where you will be able to easily take it out. So there's definitely a good array of enemies, even just with these 5 that we've seen, and we know that there's a lot more. In fact, when they were using the cheat menu to spawn in enemies, you could see different types of enemies that they had that they just weren't showcasing or maybe had not fully fleshed out yet, such as the Imp, the Spawn Lord, which I have no idea what that is, the Shatterclaw, which sounds absolutely horrifying, the Rafcan Augmenter, which I can only understand is maybe some kind of a buffer to the Rafcan family, the Fulgur Vomiter, which I cannot even imagine what that is, but the fact that it's under the Stationary tab means it could probably be something similar to the Spitball Infector. And keep in mind, a lot of these particular enemies are probably subject to change. Even the stuff that we saw is probably subject to change, so it's very possible that what we saw might be very different come the actual game's release. But still, the enemy design was very well done, and I think that the Correspond family is a very welcome addition to the DRG roster. Yes, I'm going to miss the bugs a little bit, but I can always just go back to normal DeepRock if I want to play that. And seeing these new, very alien-type enemies is going to be a nice change of pace from what we've seen before. But then the last 2 enemies that we saw are 2 of the Rafcan family of enemies. We saw the Rafcan Thrasher and the Rafcan Rammer. These are basically like space sharks. They're kind of like floating space sharks that will literally just ram into you in most cases. They kind of just try to displace you or push you away from the team. This is basically their answer to people wanting to see the rammer from the board game implemented into the game, just in a bit of a different way. The fact that they are airborne makes them a little bit different. I think I said this in my last video, but they kind of remind me of the Nemesis from Gears of War in the way that they're shaped, and they're definitely going to offer a bit of a different sort of play style, and these seem to be kind of their take on the Mac Terra Swarm that we saw in normal DeepRock, but a little bit different. And again, there's going to be more variants to the Rafcan family that we just have to be on the lookout for. And then the final thing that they talked about, which is probably the one thing that people are most looking forward to, is the class system. For a while, even myself included, a lot of people were under the assumption that there wasn't really going to be a class system, because that's kind of what they said in the very beginning, at least if I'm remembering correctly. And they said it was going to be much more of a free-form sort of class system where you were going to be able to put together whatever you want. and maybe have some sort of setup ability that you could use. But then they basically decided to change it to an actual class system. But the classes themselves don't really determine anything other than the class ability that you have access to. Each class has a particular ability that they can use during the course of the mission that is unique to them and maybe gives you a premise to sort of build around. Now, what's funny is they showcase 2 of the classes in the actual stream, but they kind of actually messed up and accidentally spoiled all 5 of the classes in the cheat menu. When they were showcasing the classes and they were changing to them, you could see the different class names. We have the Slicer, the Falconeer, the Guardian, the Spotter, and the Gorgon. Now, they only showcased 2 of them, as I said. They showcased the Slicer and the Falconeer. The Slicer is everybody's prayers answered to finally having melee combat in DeepRockGalactic, because this thing has a Halo-style energy sword that is capable of cutting through enemies very quickly and very powerfully. I'm not sure if they were really strong just for showcasing the power purposes, but it seemed like their energy blade slash move did a lot more damage than I was expecting. The damage numbers were popping up and it was showing like 1,000+ damage. Kind of crazy. But the fact that we actually have melee combat officially in Rogue Core is incredible, and the Slicer seems to be a lot of fun. And the fact that they went with this particular direction to go with a sort of sci-fi energy blade is really cool. And for close quarters combat lovers, this is probably going to be the class that a lot of people are going to want to play. And then the second class that they showcased was the Falconeer, who basically seems to be a combination of the Engineer mixed with a Beastmaster Falconer, because they have this strange cybernetic gauntlet that is actually a robotic hawk or bird type thing. It's basically a drone that they can shoot out and direct to wherever they want to go. It can attack enemies, it can crowd control things, it has electricity attacks and stunning capabilities as we saw, and the player is able to direct it to go basically wherever it wants. So you can have it fight a specific enemy to keep it locked down, or you can maybe make it swipe through several enemies. It just seems like a really cool ability, and you are definitely going to be able to improve this in a lot of ways. As somebody who is an engineer main at DeepRockGalactic, normally this might be the class that I have to pick up because it just seems to be incredibly cool. Now, when it comes to the other classes, we have the Guardian, the Spotter, and the Gorgon. The Guardian seems to me is probably going to be a defensive tank-oriented class. It's probably going to have some sort of a energy shield ability or maybe some sort of invulnerability move. We're not quite 100% sure exactly what they're going to do with it because they didn't showcase actually what it did. We just were able to see it in the class selection menu as well as in a couple of other shots. I'm assuming it's going to be some sort of defensive bulwark type class similar to the Gunner from DeepRockGalactic, just probably in a more defensive way. And then the Spotter is probably going to be similar to the Scout class in normal Deep Rock, where it is going to be a high info gathering class. One thing that they didn't showcase or didn't mention is whether or not the terrain scanner or the marking tool is going to be something that is also going to be prevalent in this game. Because if there's no marking, it's going to be hard to sort of see where certain enemies are coming from, but that might be something that is specific to the Spotter class. They might be able to mark things, they might be able to debuff things. I'm thinking of the Marked for Death overclock for the M1000 that we got in Season 5 of DRG. Something like that might be what the Spotter is capable of doing, marking an enemy and debuffing them, saying, hey, this is a high priority target, take this out very quickly. Or they might be able to find minerals or something along those lines. It might be able to detect enemies or something. But the Spotter, at least seems to me, is probably going to be the information gathering class. And then the Gorgon, in all honesty, I have absolutely no idea what this class could be. Going off of the name, it's a little bit difficult to discern exactly what it's going to do. It could be some sort of debuffing class. I don't think there's a way you could put enemies to stone in this game, but it could be some sort of elementalist class. If you guys have any theories or ideas of what the Gorgon class could be, let me know down in the comments, because I am genuinely at a loss of what this could possibly be. Because again, they didn't showcase any of it. But this also changes a lot of things because we have 5 classes, where in DeepRockGalactic we only have 4 because it's 4 players. So the fact that there are 5 classes, at least right now, that we can use, which they may add more later on, we still have no idea, is kind of crazy, because this means that we have a lot more ways to be able to customize ourselves than we ever thought before. And I can hear people saying, well, why don't they add a 5th class in Deep Rock normally? And the answer to that is because the classes in Deep Rock are preset to have different abilities, different tools, different weapons, whereas here it's very freeform. So you can add a new class that just has a different ability, and that's just a slight variation of stuff that you can normally do. You can still make the same weapons, you can still make the same equipment, just have a slightly different ability, and it really won't change a whole lot. It's hard to say which one of these is going to be meta or which ones of these are going to be busted, because again, we just don't have as much information as we would want. And that is everything that they talked about on the surface, as well as some stuff that I was able to find that were sort of hidden or accidental plentifully showcased in the On the Horizon stream regarding the Rogue Core information. And there is a lot of information that we got, and there is going to be more information coming out within the next several weeks or months or whatever the case may be. And I will try my absolute best to keep you guys updated in the loop as to what devs are doing. And let me know down in the comments what your guys' favorite thing about Rogue Core is that you saw with this particular stream, or what you're looking forward to the most, or things that you might want to see in the game. We're still a long ways away from even a public alpha for people to play, so a lot of the stuff that we showcased and talked about today is subject to change at the drop of a hat, so keep that in mind, that a lot of things that I talk about might be completely different by the time the game comes out, but still let me know what you guys think down in the comments. I love hearing what you guys have to say. Anyway, I hope you guys found this video informative and entertaining. If you did, please be sure to let me know by hitting that like button and consider becoming a member and subscribing today, as it really helps out the channel a lot. Rocket Stone Miners, I'll see you in the next video.